that tonight. I'm going to talk about a few things that nobody else is talking about, but I think that are the key problems that have got us off course. And until they're corrected, it doesn't matter about all these other issues, because if we don't get back on course, we can solve all these things and we're still going to be in big trouble. Now, because we as a nation are becoming more and more of a social democracy. We're moving away from the republic that was set up. And little by little, we're becoming more of a social democracy. You hear a lot of people, a lot of citizens, democracy. Oh, democracy. Yeah, we believe in democracy. We believe that's a principle in electing our officials. We are a republic. We are not a democracy. We are a republic.
That's right.
And that republic is set up to keep democracy under control. Because pure democracy, the 51% of the people rule. And that's not what this government was set up to be. So we saw at the time of the Civil War that the states were very much in control, weren't they? They were powerful, strong. The loyalty of our citizens were to their state. The federal government was bouncing along, doing okay, but not really well, to the point where half the states wanted to secede from the Union. And Abraham Lincoln, as a young man, worried about this. He told the family one time, the Browning family, you know, who makes the rifles. He was in heaven when he was riding the circuit on his horse as a young lawyer. They were talking about what was coming in 30 years. And he said, you know, if we go down this road, because he saw that they were off course, we go down this road, our country's going to be split apart. It's going to be like a big piece of iron broken, and it's going to take a strong and a wise welder to weld it back together. It was prophetic. He did it. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't perfect, but we kept together as a nation. They were off course, and it had to be a major correction. Now, after the Civil War, a lot of things got turned around what he wanted to have happen. A lot of things didn't go the way he wanted and planned. And little by little, we grew, we prospered, we added states, things were going, and people were distracted by many good things that were happening. They were caught up in, and around the turn of the century, some of the things that were happening in Russia and overseas became popular here. Some people, citizens here in the United States, started to like these socialist ideas, and they started talking about it. Why don't we try some of these plans? Economically, politically. You know all this. But that's what was happening during the turn of the century. In the 90s and 1910, and some of them were becoming popular, and some of the people who were teaching these ideas and promoting them were in power. In 1913, our President Wilson was in office. In 1913, we amended the Constitution. Now, we think that the Constitution is a document that can be better. Now, every amendment that protects our individual rights is good. And every amendment that restricts government is good. But every amendment that takes away our freedoms and our rights and gives government a little more power is not good. I think you all believe that. I believe that with all my heart. I believe that with all my heart. So I look at our amendments. There are some that are giving government more power, and they need to be repealed. That's the only correction. That's the only solution. In 1913, there was an amendment, the 16th Amendment. Anybody help me, please? Oh, it was an easy thing. It's only 2%, just a small thing. And they used to get money from the states. The federal government had to do their budget, present it to the states, and say, they got their money from the states. Please.
My understanding is it's for the very wealthy.
Yeah, and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big thing when it first started, and it went up to 6%. It wasn't really a big thing, and nobody noticed. They didn't really even realize how it even passed. But you can look in Wikipedia. It's a great read, a great study to see the history of how it all happened. But it passed. And we got off course just a little bit then. Only 2%. Only 2%. But the government now didn't have to get, as the Constitution said, they didn't have to get the money from the states. They could go into your pocket and my pocket and everybody's and take a little bit. But we know how that has progressed. Some people are in the 15% and the 25% and the brackets. I call it, well, back in the Tea Party days, it was taxation without representation. I call our IRS, our taxation now, taxation without limitation. There's no limit. The federal government, on the federal government, is what they can take from you. There isn't. There is no limit. I don't know if you believe that, but I believe that. And they are discovering that, and it's just happening. Please.
The other thing is not only are they taxing us, but they're still borrowing money
Oh,
on top of it.
borrowing money we don't have to give to people that, yeah, it doesn't stay here. It's loaned elsewhere. Okay, that's one thing, the taxation. That was one of the things we got off course just a little bit, but we're way off course on that now. The IRS tax code, and I don't know if anybody here, but no one that I know can understand the whole thing. We do our taxes every year. He's a very capable CPA, and he's just always going to conferences, and I mean, just to keep up with all the changes, and still there's areas he doesn't want to touch. So we're off course. That is a major, major thing that we're off course. The same year, 1913, just months after this 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment was passed. Anybody remember what that is? The senators. Prior to 1913, the senators were elected by their state legislature. Arizona became a state in 1912? I'm sorry, I need to keep up. Yeah, 1912. They were a new state, everybody was excited, and so it just got kind of thrown into, and instead of the state legislature, they said, oh yeah, it's okay. Well, you know, we believe in democracy. Let the people decide. And they were concerned about, you know, corruption and all these other things, but they left what the Founding Fathers had given us and now allowed senators to be elected by the public vote. When that happened, the states lost everything they had, even more. Because after the Civil War, the federal government got a lot stronger and the states were a lot weaker. And when they lost the senators, they got a lot weaker. No one to represent the states. Figuratively, or you know, we think the senators to represent the states, but they're not. Who are they beholding to? Since that time, our senators, it doesn't, the lobbyists, it doesn't matter who's in power. Republicans, Democrats, it doesn't matter. They gang up or they hold their ground. It becomes a party issue. It becomes a party fight. They're not protecting their states, because that was one of the key balances of power that our founding fathers. The senators were to be there in their 6 years rather than 2 years. They were to be the wiser group, the higher house, and the House represented the lower house. They were to be the ones to maintain states' rights and to keep a lid on this group of, vibrant representatives. When we lost that as a nation, we got off course quite a bit. And it turned in, there was no longer the balance and check that we had. They gang up with the president, and at that same time, presidents, up until that time, except I guess for Woodrow Wilson, were pretty disciplined in what they did as a president. From that time on, every president, you remember Teddy Roosevelt, what was he famous for? Where's the pulpit? What was the term they called?
Bully pulpit.
The bully pulpit. The president was the bully pulpit now. And every president since then has tried to do a little bit more and become a little stronger, flex his muscles a little bit more to do things that the Constitution would not sanction. Republicans and Democrats alike. Every one of them. Even the ones we'd really love. That's the culture we've created when we lost our senators. So those are two things that got us off course quite a bit. And we're down the road 100 years, 102 years. And we're off course quite a bit, and we're headed into a big mountain. Or over the cliff, or whatever you want to call it. We're headed into trouble. We are having trouble right now. The momentum is building. The time is getting shorter of being able to correct that. Now, there was something else that happened that I think should fit in with that course correction that needs to be corrected before we can solve all these other issues that were mentioned. And that was just a few years later, in 1929. Now just stop and think, what was happening in 1929? Before the big crash. What was happening? The Roaring Twenties. Oh, everybody was having a party. Spending money like, it was just a great time. And people were just not behaving themselves. Moral decline and corruption and gangsters and all, it was just a free-for-all. That sound familiar? Yeah, it was a free-for-all. That year of 1929, our government passed a law called the Redistribution Act of 1929. I hadn't heard of it until before this campaign. They said the government was growing. They had, every time a state was added, they got 2 new senators and 1 or 4 or however, some of these other western states, some of them, I don't know, I think Arizona only got 1 representative, didn't they, when they became a state? But at some point they said, wait a minute, we've got a lot of congressmen. If you look at the footprint of the House of Representatives, there's no room for any more congressmen to sit in that chamber. They got up to 238 and said, we're out of room. There's no seats. There are no seats in this chamber. What did I say? Oh, 435. Did I say it? Did I say the wrong number? Hey, if I do something wrong, raise your hand and tell me, put me in my place. That's your job. You're the government, right? When you're leaders. Yes. Pardon me?
238.
Okay, if I said, but actually they got up to 438 congressmen. And they passed the law and said, no, we won't go above 435. So that's all they have. They don't have any more seats. Think of this. When there was no limit when the Constitution was written. When the Constitution was written, there was a debate how many people a representative was represent. Guess how many people it was? Anybody know? 30,000. You know your stuff. That's great. I did the math on it, and they actually ended up about 40,000. Anybody know how many people each congressman represent today? 725,000. We need a new capital. We need a new facility. We need a new start. Senator Sasse, anybody heard of him from Nebraska? A new senator. That was one of his main points of campaigning. He was just seated as a new senator recently in the last election. When I was there, I meant to start talking about the House of Representatives. All of the Western congressmen, I heard that from almost every office. Why don't they move the capital out to the Midwest so we could, they flew all the way from the West or Alaska or Hawaii to Washington, D.C. when the guys in Maryland and Virginia would go home to their home at night, and they didn't travel like those guys. It was a burden, an imposition. There's a lot of logical reasons, rational financial reasons why it would be good to change our capital. I hope you'll think about that. I hope not only will you bring youth and other people to this meeting next time, I hope you will talk about these ideas. 16th Amendment, 17th Amendment, Reapportionment Act of 1929, and more representation. We really, as a people, are not represented well. We're not. I mean, the ones that are dedicated and want to do a good job, they just, there's no way can they know. How can they know 725,000 people, But if somebody had 100 or 200,000 to look after with the technology we have today, we could have great representation. Please.
Need term limits.
Okay. There's a lot of other things, a lot of issues, the things that we can do to solve and help. But before we address all of those things, there are some fundamental things. Correction of course, to get back on course. If we can do that as a people, if we can repeal those amendments, 16 and 17, if we can change the 1929 Reapportionment Act. So we have representation. We are in a position then to address all of these issues that we talked about.